When a little red check engine light pops up on your car's dashboard, there is there's just this inherent expectation of precision. Like you take the car to the mechanic, they plug in a diagnostic tool, they replace a faulty spark plug, and you are back on the road. It is a clean, logical transaction.
Yeah, exactly. We are deeply conditioned to just love that kind of visible, categorized system. A warning light turns on, an intervention happens, and boom, the problem is solved. I mean, we expect accountability systems to function like machinery.
Right. But when you apply that exact same dashboard logic to the American education system, things start to severely warp. Imagine you get that red check engine light. You pull into the repair shop, and instead of giving you the parts or, the fuel to fix the engine, the state confiscates your keys.
Wow, yeah.
They tell you that you are no longer allowed to make decisions about your own car, and then they demand you somehow keep driving it to work.
It is the absolute definition of a systemic malfunction. When you measure a crisis without actually resourcing the solution, the measurement itself becomes a weapon.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are looking at a highly detailed, confidential document from April 2026. It is titled Investigative Report, Structural Negligence and Accountability in Kentucky.
Right, and it's quite a heavy read.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a hidden, devastating crisis happening inside our schools. We're going to look at how well-intentioned accountability metrics have actually created this vicious cycle of data manipulation, chronic underfunding for English learners, and a bizarre, highly specific trend of school principals abruptly quitting their jobs in the month of February.
And, while the specific investigative report focuses its lens on the Commonwealth of Kentucky, it truly serves as a microcosm for a nationwide struggle.
Right. It's not just a local issue.
Exactly. What this document outlines is the friction between high-stakes testing and the realities of marginalized communities. It shows how systems designed to save failing schools are, in some cases, structurally forcing them to fail faster.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because structural negligence and accountability is a very dense bureaucratic title. But the human reality behind it is just wild.
It is.
To understand why schools are caught in this trap, we first have to look at the rules of the game they are being forced to play.
Right, and that game relies entirely around the state's accountability system. Just like your car analogy, Kentucky uses a color-coded dashboard to rank its public schools.
Blue to red, right?
Yep, blue indicates very high performance, green is high, yellow is middle, orange is low, and red is very low performance.
And falling into that red category is where the nightmare really begins. The report details two major red alert designations.
Yes, the big ones.
The first is CSI, which stands for Comprehensive Support and Improvement. That is reserved for the absolute bottom 5% of schools in the state, or high schools with a graduation rate under 80%. And then there's TSI, or Targeted Support and Improvement.
Right, and TSI is a bit more granular. A school gets a TSI label when a specific demographic subgroup underperforms for 3 consecutive years.
Subgroups like students with disabilities or English learners, right?
Exactly. Now, to understand the sheer panic currently grouping these school districts, we really have to look at a piece of legislation passed in March of 2025 called House Bill 298.
Wait, didn't schools used to have a grace period before getting hit with these severe labels?
They did, yeah. Before this bill, schools were evaluated on a 3-year cycle. The original intent behind House Bill 298 was actually rooted in a desire for transparency and urgency. Lawmakers looked at the system and argued that waiting 3 years to intervene in a struggling school meant, leaving an entire generation of middle schoolers behind before anyone stepped in.
Which sounds reasonable on paper.
Right. So the bill brought back annual CSI identification. They wanted real-time accountability.
So they completely removed the grace period. They just expected these schools to turn around deep systemic poverty and learning deficits in a single school year. What did that actually do to the numbers on the ground?
Well, the whiplash was staggering. I mean, according to the report, the number of CSI schools in Kentucky skyrocketed by 145%.
Wow, over double.
Yeah, they jumped from just 20 schools in the 2024 to 2025 school year to 49 schools in 2025 to 2026. Almost overnight, dozens of schools were suddenly slapped with this severe failing label.
And the penalty for getting that CSI label isn't just like a bad grade in the local paper. The state effectively steps in and suspends the school's SBDM council.
Right, the School-Based Decision-Making Council.
Yeah, So the parents and teachers who sat on that board completely lose their voting power over the curriculum, staffing, and budget. They get replaced by an advisory-only team, and all the real power gets centralized up at the district and state level.
It's a massive shift in control.
So it's like a corporate takeover. A struggling branch gets taken over by corporate headquarters, but instead of giving the branch manager new resources or training, they just take away their local board of directors and put them on a PIP, a performance improvement plan.
That corporate takeover analogy is spot on. And the tragedy of that dynamic is who gets silenced in the process. When a state suspends a local SBDM council, the families who lose their formal institutional voice are very often the families of English learners.
Oh, man.
Yeah, these are parents who are already facing intense language barriers and systemic marginalization. By stripping them of their formal voting power, the accountability system ironically makes the school less accountable to the actual community it is supposed to serve.
So if you are a school principal and you are terrified of this impending corporate takeover, this CSI or TSI designation, how do you avoid it? You start looking really, really closely at the specific subgroups being measured by the state.
You have to survive.
Exactly. And that brings us to the English learner, or EL, data trap.
Right, and we need to contextualize the demographics here. English learners are not some fringe niche demographic in these struggling schools. The report points out that in Kentucky's CSI schools, the median EL population is 24%.
That's a quarter of the school.
And in some of these schools, EL students make up 61% of the entire student body. If your EL students are struggling, your school is struggling.
But the districts are caught in this massive, twisted catch-22 regarding those students. I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of this. To avoid that TSI penalty on the state dashboard, schools actually have a perverse incentive to minimize their EL counts, right?
Exactly.
If the subgroup isn't large enough to be statistically counted, or if those kids just don't show up in the testing data, the school flies under the state's radar.
That is the accountability side of the trap. However, to get the federal funding they desperately need to actually teach those students, money from a federal program called Title III, the schools need to maximize their EL counts.
Right. They need every single student documented to justify getting those federal dollars.
Yeah. And it all collides on a single deadline, the second Tuesday of March. The report emphasizes this date heavily.
The second Tuesday of March.
Yes. This is the exact day the state of Kentucky pulls all the EL data from a digital system called Infinite Campus to determine funding for the following year.
It creates an impossible contradiction for district administrators. You have to maximize the numbers in March to get your funding, but minimize those exact same numbers in April for the state testing accountability window.
It's totally paralyzing.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the report claims this pressure cooker leads to actual systemic data manipulation. But how do you actively hide or inflate a student's language proficiency? I mean, isn't it just based on a standardized language test?
Well, the investigative report breaks down several typologies of how this manipulation happens on the ground, long before a student ever takes a test.
Oh, really?
First, it starts with the home language surveys. These are the initial intake forms parents fill out. Schools might use highly ambiguous questions or intentionally fail to provide proper translations.
So the parents don't even know what they're signing.
Exactly. This creates a situation where confused families answer in a way that avoids identifying their child as an English learner entirely.
Wow. Just stopping it at the front door so the student never even enters the system?
It's brutal. And another deeply damaging method is strategic premature reclassification.
Wait, how does that work? You just declare a kid fluent when they really aren't?
Essentially, yes. If a student is doing relatively well but perhaps hasn't fully mastered academic English yet, a school might strategically kick them out of the EL program.
Just to get them off the books.
Right. And the mechanism here serves a dual purpose. First, it artificially shrinks the size of the EL subgroup, sometimes pushing it below the threshold where the state even counts it for a TSI penalty.
Okay.
Second, it pushes a relatively higher performing test score out of the EL subgroup and into the general student population, artificially boosting the school's overall averages.
That is incredibly manipulative.
And it doesn't stop there. They also utilize strategic transfers, literally moving kids between different schools in the district just to dilute the concentration of EL students in any one specific building.
So they are actively moving children around like numbers on a spreadsheet just to game a dashboard. I think what's really blowing my mind here is the financial side of this equation. Why go to such extreme, ethically dubious lengths? Because Earlier you mentioned they desperately need that federal Title III money.
They do.
Does Kentucky just not provide any state money to teach these kids?
That is the core of the crisis. Under Kentucky's main funding formula, which is known as SEEK, there is absolutely no dedicated funding stream specifically for English learner students.
Not at all.
None. The state formula relies on local property taxes and a state-based guarantee, but zero state dollars are specifically earmarked for EL instruction.
Zero. I mean, the state requires these schools to meet incredibly high accountability standards for EL students under threat of a total local takeover, but provides zero dedicated state dollars to actually meet those standards.
That is the harsh reality these districts face. And because they receive no dedicated state funds, they are entirely dependent on federal Title III funds to hire bilingual staff, buy translated materials, or run EL programs.
It's all rested on federal dollars.
Yes, and that heavy reliance on federal funding became a massive vulnerability due to sweeping, unprecedented policy changes in 2025.
Now, we need to be explicitly clear for you listening. We are impartially relaying the policy context exactly as this investigative report outlines it. We aren't taking any political sides here.
Absolutely not.
But to understand the sheer panic at the district level, you have to look at the systemic uncertainty these 2025 federal actions created, because the report highlights them as a major catalyst for this crisis.
Right. The report documents a series of major shifts at the federal level. In July 2025, the U.S. Department of Education temporarily withheld $6.2 billion in K-12 funding, which included $890 million in Title III funds specifically meant for English learners.
Even temporarily, that's terrifying for a district.
Yes. Even though those funds were eventually released, the precedent sent shockwaves through the education system. Furthermore, the report notes a subsequent federal budget proposal that aimed to eliminate Title III entirely.
So the one lifeline these schools have is suddenly incredibly fragile.
Exactly. The report also lists executive orders designating English as the official language. And crucially, the federal government withdrew a long-standing Dear Colleague letter.
What was that letter doing?
Well, for years, that letter had served as the definitive guidance document outlining the civil rights protections, translation services, and accommodations schools were legally required to provide to EL students.
So let me get this straight. The federal dollars they completely rely on are threatened, and the federal guidance explaining how to legally protect these kids just vanishes overnight.
Yes. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the withdrawal of that federal oversight doesn't actually change the law itself. That is a vital legal distinction the report makes.
Right, because civil rights are still civil rights.
Exactly. Despite the 2025 changes, fundamental legal precedents are still the law of the land. For example, the famous 1974 Supreme Court case, Lau v. Nichols.
Oh, that's the case with the students in San Francisco, right?
Yes. About 1,800 Chinese-American students were given the exact same instruction and textbooks as native English speakers, without any supplemental language support.
Wow.
The Supreme Court ruled unanimously that providing the same exact materials to non-English speakers does not constitute equal opportunity. It violates the Civil Rights Act.
Right, because if you literally cannot understand the language of instruction, you are effectively excluded from the education entirely. Handing a kid a physics textbook in a language they can't read isn't equality.
Precisely, and that ruling was followed by the 1981 case Castaneda v. Pickard, which established a strict three-part test for EL programs.
What are the three parts?
Well, for a school's program to be legal, it has to be based on sound educational theory, it must be implemented effectively with adequate resources, and it must be proven to actually produce results. That is still the law today.
But how are schools failing that test today? I mean, if it's the law.
Well, when a school district is starved for cash by the state and the federal guardrails vanish, they start cutting corners to survive. A school violates the Castaneda test when they fail to hire certified bilingual teachers to save money, or, when they rely on a single uncertified aide to handle a massive caseload of 80 students.
Right, they aren't providing adequate resources.
Exactly. But with the Dear Colleague letter gone, districts feel like the federal government is no longer watching. It just opens the door to this structural negligence.
So we have this massive, crushing accountability from the state dashboard. We have zero dedicated state funding, we have federal funding that is completely insecure, and we have widespread, desperate data manipulation.
It's a complete mess.
Who is left holding the bag when this whole house of cards collapses?
The school principal. The human toll on building leaders is incredibly heavy. The report notes that the national turnover rate for principals is about 8%. But in high-poverty schools, it jumps to 21%.
21%. That's huge.
And the investigators pinpointed something truly fascinating. They identified a highly specific structural breaking point for these principles, a specific month where the dam breaks.
Yeah, why February? The report dedicates an entire section to analyzing why a principal quits in February. It seems so random right in the middle of the school year.
It is not random at all. It is a perfect storm of converging timelines. In January, the principal gets their first semester data back. They can clearly see if their school is heading toward that dreaded CSI or TSI red designation on the state dashboard.
The writing is on the wall.
Exactly. Then February hits. This is when district contract renewal discussions begin. It is also when budget planning for the next year starts, revealing to the principal that the district is not going to give them the money to hire the EL teachers they desperately need.
And looming right around the corner is the second Tuesday of March. That massive data pool from Infinite Campus that dictates next year's funding.
Right.
And right after that, the spring state testing evaluations. The pressure is coming from every conceivable direction.
The report lays out two really compelling hypotheses for why principals formally resign in February under this pressure. The first is what they call the ethical exit.
The ethical exit. Imagine you are that principal sitting at your desk in February. You are looking at a spreadsheet. You discover that the EL data in your school is being systematically manipulated by the district to game the state dashboard.
It's a terrible position to be in.
You realize that if you report it internally, the district might retaliate against you. If you blow the whistle externally to the state, you could be blacklisted and ruin your entire career in education. So what do? You quietly resign in February to avoid being complicit in the fraud.
That's the first theory. And the second hypothesis is the scapegoat.
The scapegoat.
Yes. This is where the district administration looks at the impending disastrous spring test scores and actively forces the principal out in February.
Oh, wow. They just push him out the door.
By doing this, the district can safely blame the inevitable bad testing results on outgoing leadership. Then they present the new incoming principal to the state as evidence of a fresh start. This completely protects the district administration from any scrutiny over their own failure to fund the school properly.
So what does this all mean? It's like a captain choosing to abandon a sinking ship in the middle of the night. But they aren't leaving out of cowardice. They are abandoning ship because the shipping company is forcing them to lie on the manifest about a giant hole in the hull. A hole they aren't given any tools, crew, or money to actually fix.
That is a perfect way to put it. And what happens when the captain leaves? The report points out a tragic cascade effect.
Right, because it doesn't just stop with the principal.
Exactly. When a principal walks out the door in February, teacher turnover immediately spikes. All the institutional knowledge about those specific students and their families vanishes.
The connections are just gone.
The EL families, who may have spent years building trust with that one principal, lose their primary community liaison. As a result, student performance drops even further. The accountability system perpetuates the exact cycle of failure that the CSI designation was supposed to prevent.
It is an incredibly sobering chain of events. Just summarizing this causal chain from the report for a second, you start with inadequate state funding for English learners. That lack of resources leads directly to poor EL performance on state tests.
Right.
That poor performance triggers the CSI or TSI accountability labels. That label puts immense job-threatening pressure on the school principal. That pressure creates the incentive for the district to manipulate the data to survive. The ethical burnout from that manipulation leads to principals resigning in February, and that turnover further harms the most vulnerable students.
It is a system that is functioning exactly as it is currently designed, but the design itself is deeply structurally flawed.
Whether you are a parent sitting on one of those SBDM councils, a taxpayer, or just someone who cares about the health of your local community, understanding this invisible machinery is vital. When we open the newspaper or scroll online and read a headline about failing schools, it is so easy to just blame the teachers or the principal.
Oh, absolutely.
We assume the red check engine light means the driver is doing something wrong. But this report proves there is an entire labyrinth of bureaucratic policy, funding gaps, and perverse pressure behind that failing label.
It really changes how you look at the whole system. And this raises an important question, and it's something I think everyone needs to consider long after this deep dive ends.
What's that?
Well, the entire accountability system, from the federal level down to the state dashboard, was originally designed to ensure no child is left behind. It was built to force us to look at the data and help those who are struggling. But if the metrics we use to measure success are forcing good, ethical leaders to quit and encouraging administrative systems to literally erase the data of the most vulnerable students just to survive, at what point does our accountability system become the very thing preventing true accountability?